Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jared. I'm one of the team members from Podcast Movement, and we're real excited today to have Durin Gleaves. He's one of the product managers for Adobe, and so this is a really cool opportunity. Durin, why don't we start out with maybe just tell us a little bit of your background and then kind of what you're up to, and then I'm just going to kind of duck out and let you take it over.
Sure, thanks. So I'm Durin Gleaves. I'm product manager for audio at Adobe. That's probably most well known to you, everybody watching this stream, as the creators of the application Audition. But it's also Premiere Pro. Maybe you've heard of Photoshop, those kind of tools. So I have the luxury of working on sound and audio tools, which has long been a passion of mine since I was 10 or 11 and hot wiring an old CB radio to my mom's car battery through radio, a stint in college radio, and then just a lot of audio experimentation. And now I get to make audio tools for people who are doing a lot of the same kind of cool things. So that's fantastic. And I was really excited when you all reached out and asked if I'd be interested in presenting some best practices for new podcasters, especially under the umbrella of Creative Cloud, which is where my expertise tends to lie. So I'll get right to it. If there's any questions, please share them. I should be able to see them pop up in the background, or if something's especially pressing, Jared can certainly interrupt me. But I'll get right to it. So Adobe, if you're familiar, our Creative Cloud service, there are a lot of tools in there, roughly 40 applications, a bunch of services, cloud tools, mobile applications. And I'm going to cover a few of the things that are really relevant to people who are coming to podcasting for the first time and maybe don't really realize the scale of what it takes to create a podcast, because a podcast isn't really just an MP3 file anymore. There's album artwork, there's landing pages, there's websites, there's publishing, all of this stuff. And while we're not going to be able to cover everything in an hour, I'm going to try and show you some of the cool things that you can really take advantage of as either an Adobe Creative Cloud member, or with alternative tools out in the market that maybe you prefer to use. I'll give you some of the whys about and a little bit of data to back up why I'm sharing some of that. But I'll just jump right into it. So whether there's a lot of ways to record a podcast, whether it's it's a pair of AirPods right here and you're just recording on your phone, whether you've got yourself a little portable recorder like this Zoom, not the same as the online software company, which I'll reference in a minute, or whether you've gone all in, you've upgraded to something like the Rodecaster Pro, which is a fantastic piece of hardware. I'm not paid to talk about how great it is, but I really love it. It's for podcasters, it's really well put together. Or you're using software like Skype or Zoom or Zencaster or some of these other tools to be able to capture those interviews and those conversations that will become your podcast content. You can also record directly into Audition using a microphone like this, or other interfaces and audio interfaces. It's really pretty open. So I'm going to cover a couple things. Let me get my screen shared here and make sure I'm going to do this right. And I'll just pop over here to Audition. So this is Audition, Adobe Audition. If you've used it before, or if you haven't used it before, let me kind of give a little look at the two different working modes with Audition. One is our waveform editor, and this is a single file editor. You'll see something that looks like a waveform, something you might see on CSI. There's a couple different options about how to view audio and how to edit the audio, but really it's a way to record a single person, or maybe even two people left, on two different channels, but really just to record something freeform. And it's really just as easy as making a new file, and set it to this mode and clicking record, and we'll start recording what you're saying. And This is great, and this is where if you capture something on a device like the Zoom or an external device, and you bring it over to your computer, this is generally the first place you'll import that file to. So I'm going to open a project, but I'm going to show you one of the files in that project to kind of give you an idea of what I mean. So in this case, I'll actually show you the multi-track. You can see there's two participants, one on the first track and one on the second track. And if we kind of zoom in a little bit, and I'll right click and drag in the ruler to zoom in, you can see that when person 1 in the green is speaking, person 2 here in the purple tends to be politely staying quiet. Sometimes they may interject a or yeah or something like that. But generally they kind of go back and forth. And if we come over here and we look at the raw recording of this, you'll see that that's pretty much the case in the raw recording. There's a section where the person's talking and then they're not talking. And one of the things I like to recommend for people who are just getting into bringing these recordings in is being able to start to do sort of a rough cut edit. And there's a couple ways to do that, but if you've got a raw recording, and if we're playing here and I'm listening to it,
it's a mom thing.
So I can kind of say, oh, so she said there, that's a mom thing. I might want to just do a little pre-work before I actually start editing my podcast and figuring out. A lot of times you'll come in with, an hour or even more of recording content, but you don't want to share that whole hour. You want to pick and choose the best parts. And so one of the ways that I recommend doing that is to come and listen to those sections, find the sections that are interesting that you may probably want to use or that you might want to use, select them just by, putting your cursor at the beginning and dragging over, and then hitting M, which creates a marker range. And you can see when I click that, there's a new marker thing up here at the top. And I don't know if I can get my Zoom working or not. Maybe not. No, it doesn't look like it. Oh, that's okay. So there's this new marker range at the top, and over here in the markers panel is a new marker, and it's called marker 01 by default. But if I remember listening to it,
yeah, I mean,
it's a new mom thing. It's a mom thing. So I'm going to just go over here and just click on the title and say it's a mom thing. A little something that's going to help me remember what was said or what that little section's about. And what's nice about this is if I ever come in here and I just double click that marker, it will automatically select that part of the file for me. So I don't have to try and remember, oh, is this the part that I wanted? Is this the part that I wanted? I can start to do it here. So if I listen here.
But, I think that there's probably a few things.
A few things, maybe that's the keyword for me. So again, I'll hit M to make that marker. There's a shortcut of / to rename it, but you can also just come and click in the title. And there's a few things. So I can start to do this with some of these. Maybe I don't want that one. Maybe I really like whatever is said during this period. So I'll add that and I'll rename this. And this was, I like this. I think that there are blah, 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 something like that. Just whatever you can use as your own notes. And then how this can become useful later is when I create a new multi-track session. And the multi-track session is basically where I can start to lay out all these different little sound bites in a way that has the timing and has other elements like music and sound effects that I want to bring into my production. I can start to do that here with a multi-track session. So the waveform editor is maybe where we do some pre-work, and either we're recording ourselves, our narration or VO, cleaning up or marking up our interviews. But then the multi-track session is where we align all those things. It's sort of the artboard for how we're laying out the collage of our podcast. And for now, I'm just going to use the default settings. We'll go into that in a minute. But you can see now, if I was to just bring in this file and drop it into the track, it's the whole thing. It does. You can see the little dots around some of those selections I made, but I lose any of that context. And that's not what I want. Here in the markers panel, there's a button here that says show markers for all files. And if I click that, I can see those marker ranges inside of that file that I made. In fact, if I make a couple more for the other file in my recording, the other participant, and I name this one, there's a very good reason, something like that. And we come back to our multi-track project. Now I see those marker ranges for all the assets, all the files and recordings that are part of my project. And I can, because I've specified a selection, I've selected that time in that WAV file and made a marker from it, I can actually just bring that soundbite in and drop it by itself. So there's a few things. It's a mom thing. There's a very good reason. I can start to separate and lay these out how I like. And now I can move those little sound bites around. If I zoom in, I can adjust not only where they come in, maybe I want to start a little earlier or come in a little bit later. I can start to put in better timing between the two so there's not awkward long gaps. Or if somebody answered too quickly, I can maybe give a little bit of air between the question and the answer and make it sound maybe a little more natural, or at least flow with the style I'm looking for. All of these clips can also have fades, so I can add a fade in and a fade out, so I can get nice smooth transitions. I don't have to have suddenly, somebody's speaking very loudly, or if there's some background noise, you can fade it out rather than having it just stop abruptly. If you're cutting up conversations from the same person, and I'll do that with the razor tool here, and maybe I'm listening, and right here, I want to cut out this word. Maybe there was a cough, or maybe she said, I think that actually, let me change my thought. Maybe I don't need that. That's kind of frivolous. So I can actually cut that out with that razor tool and then align these up. And more than just align them, I can overlap a little, and you'll see we get this. I'll zoom in by right click and dragging. We get this this automatic crossfade when we overlap two clips. I can still come in and adjust how that sounds, but that gives me a smooth transition and lets me make those kinds of edits sound a little more natural than they might if I was just chopping and pasting the words that somebody was using. We could certainly go into more detail on that. There are resources for that, lots on YouTube and Adobe's website. I'll give you links to both of those near the end of this session, but I want to cover as much as I can. So I'm going to move a little quickly. Now, there may be questions about why would I use waveform versus multitrack, apart from just the ability to do that pre-edit and kind of find the content that you want. And there's a couple reasons. One, waveform is what we call a destructive editor, and that sounds scary. But what it means is when I'm working in this view, I'm working generally on one file at a time, and I'm making changes that when I hit Command or Control S to save, I'm actually overwriting that file on disk. And there's two things to think about when you're working this way. One is you should always be working from copies of your files. Never just take your original SD card or your original WAV files and throw them into something and just, YOLO, right? What you kind of want to do is make sure you've copied your source media somewhere else. Keep it safe. It's not necessarily something you might do in Audition, but there's always that possibility of hardware failures, hard drive failures, USB drives getting stepped on. I mean, if you were part of the pre-call for this session, you notice I just dropped a lamp, or you would have seen me drop a lamp on my floor and break it. So you never know when something unexpected is going to happen. So always work with copies of your files, but then you can bring them in and feel more comfortable about really exploring and getting creative and not being locked into a corner because you've made some changes you can't restore. Whereas waveform, therefore, is a destructive editor. Multitrack is what we call a non-destructive editor. And that means the clips that I have on the timeline here are referencing some portion of a file on disk, one of those ones that I've opened in waveform view, but we're never changing those files in this view. Anything that we do is layered on top. So when I say I want to add a fade to this clip here, it's a non-destructive fade that's I can go back and change as much as I want, anytime that I want. If I was to do that same sort of fade here in waveform view, we have those controls here, but you'll see that when I let go, that WAV file is now changed. I've made that change. So if I was to hit Command S and save this file, I would write that fade into disk, and I may not be able to undo it later. So if you're going to make those you want to have that flexibility. Multitrack is a great way of working that. And it also lets me start to layer elements together. So maybe, this is great. This interview is going back and forth. Let me bring this over so it actually looks like it's part of this conversation. But what would really drive things home is some background music, maybe. I can certainly come in and start to layer in AC/DC Thunderstruck. That sounds like a great track. Drop that in the background. Audition will make sure that everything is the same file format and sample types so that nothing sounds too chipmunky or slowed down. And you can start to layer those sounds together. So in this case, now you would hear not only the dialogue in the interview, but the music behind it. And in this case, it's AC/DC. It's going to be loud. Maybe I don't want it loud. And this is assuming you have rights to use AC/DC or whatever piece of music that you're going to be using in your podcast. So then we move beyond the sort of the concept of editing, which is really just chopping up the bits and pieces that you want to use for your podcast, the content part, and entering the realm of mixing, which is adding those elements with other elements to create something that's bigger than the whole. And in this case, putting background music behind a piece of an interview. So traditionally, how this would be done was, let me make it a little more visible here, a little easier to understand. I'm going to put a couple of clips here, and I'm going to shrink these down so that we can zoom in and kind of be working with a little bit more smaller scale. So the green and purple tracks up here are dialogue. They're the interview process between the two folks in my podcast, the host and the guest, maybe. And this yellow one in this case is my music track. Now, traditionally, what we do when we mix music and dialogue or narration is something called ducking, and that's when we bring the music down while somebody is speaking, and then when there's a pause or a gap between what they're saying, we bring the music back up. And then not only does it sound a little bit better, just tonally and culturally, but it also has the effect of sort of keeping the same general overall loudness level to the listener. Otherwise, you're going to have, when somebody's talking and there's music, it's going to seem louder. And then when the music's just playing by itself, it would seem quieter, and then it's going to get louder. And that can get, while it can be used to dramatic effect, it can also be get kind of fatiguing and tiring and jarring to listeners. So what we do is something called mixing, and that's really adjusting the loudness level, the gain, the volume of each of these different elements so that they sound balanced, and so that the parts that we want to stand out, the dialogue, stand out and are clearly audible above the parts that we don't necessarily want them to be front and center, the music in this case. So traditionally, this might be done by editing what's called keyframes. And so you can see there's this kind of yellow line. Maybe you can see that over the screen share. And in Audition, you can kind of just click on that line to drop keyframes, add other ones. And then as you move those around, that will adjust the volume down, the volume up. It gets louder, it gets quieter. You can see there's a little tooltip next to the cursor that kind of shows you what's going on. And you might align that with where your dialogue starts and ends. But as you can see, it's a very kind of a cumbersome process to do it manually this way. And it's prone to error. I got to make sure that this is exactly the same. And I got to align this just right. But what happens if I need to nudge this clip over? Now I got to come and move these keyframes. So it's very prone to a lot of busy work and prone to errors. I'm going to undo all of that and show you a better way. And that's through something Audition has and called the Essential Sound Panel. And it was a way of taking complex editing and mixing tasks in a multi-track environment and making them simpler, abstracting them a little bit, but still giving you the power to customize or even learn the in-depth, the effects and the techniques that are used. And I'll show you what that is, how that works right now. As I mentioned, I have dialogue clips, music clip. I might have sound effects, and I might have ambient sounds. I might have something like a coffee shop, an outdoor coffee shop, lots of glasses clinking, people talking, cars, whatever environmental kind of feeling I want to give my podcast. And all of those elements are, while they're all sound, they all tend to be treated a little differently. And so dialogue is, you do different things to dialogue than you would do to music. You would do different things to music than you would do to a car driving by sound effect. So how we work around that with the Essential Sound Panel is you select your clips of a particular type. In this case, I'll select my dialogue clips. And in the Essential Sound Panel, which is here to the right, and if it's not on your side, you can always come and click Window Essential Sound panel to open it. I start by tagging those selected clips as one of those types of content. Right now, Audition isn't smart enough to know that, oh, these are dialogue and this is music and that's sound effects. So we have to tell it what's what. So I select those top two, or those 2 tracks of clips, and I tag them as dialogue. And you see that now I have 4 groups of things that can be done to dialogue clips. Likewise, let me unselect and I'll select my music clip, and this one I'll tag as music. And you can see now I have just 3 different groups, and they're slightly different, different things that I can do to them. I'll go back and start with the dialogue. So if I have nothing selected, but I've already tagged some clips, now I can quickly reselect them all just by clicking the tag that I want to select. And you can see that selected all those green and purple dialogue clips. And now I have some options. And the first thing you might notice is the purple clip, the waveform tends to be a little bit louder looking than the green clips, maybe just a little bit, but there's definitely a difference. And so that will result in one part of the conversation, one participant talking a little quieter like this, and then the second participant, when they come in, talking a little bit louder, and it's going to sound odd. Now I could come in and adjust the gain of these by hand, which may be fine when there's only these 4 clips. But if you've cut it up and there's 100 clips on the timeline, that's another place where you're going to be prone to error. It's going to take a lot of time. And if you want to make changes later, it's going to be kind of a pain. So in this case, we have something called the loudness group inside the dialogue. And this lets me click one button and all the selected clips will be matched so that they're relative to each other, the same overall loudness. This is really fast and really fantastic because it gets everything very close to each other, but it still lets me then come in and make customizations. So I can still make this louder, or I can draw the, those keyframes over the top, but I'm starting from a common frame of reference. I'm not having to treat every single clip differently. And you can see with each clip, you can see at the bottom how much it was adjusted. So this one was negative 2.5 decibels. That means it was brought down a little bit. Same with this one. This one is brought down a little bit further, negative 3.5. And this purple clip that I said was louder than the green, it was actually brought down negative 7.2 decibels. So it was kind of perceived as twice as loud as the others and brought down to match. If nothing else, if you do nothing else, auto match loudness will at least get things balanced. And so if you're in a hurry and you've got to get this podcast or this mix out there published in the next 5 minutes or you're fired, this is a great way to just make it sound a little polished. But certainly if you have more time, there's other things you can do. The next section down is our repair section. And that lets you do things like reduce noise, maybe low frequency rumble. If you were set up your Zoom recorder in a bar or restaurant to interview somebody and you happen to be next to the refrigerator or the air conditioner, that can help de-hum, de-ess, reverb reduction. If you were in a room that had some reflections off the walls, it won't do magic in every situation, but it can save some recordings that might otherwise sound like they were recorded in a big empty room or inside a metal tank or something like that. And how these work is you really just check the ones that you want. Let's say reduce noise, and then adjust the slider, less noise reduction or more noise reduction. And you can do this while you're playing back. And in fact, you might want to solo that track, hit play, and then less noise reduction, more noise reduction. And what's going on, if we switch over here to our effects rack, which will show us, select a single clip and choose the clip mode, is what we do. What happens when we turn one of these on, let's say the dehummer, is you can see over in the effects rack, when I check the dehum box in the Essential Sound panel, we're adding Audition's native effect, to the clip. We're making decisions based on a few of the parameters that we've provided in the Essential Sound panel that are most likely to be something you want to adjust. In this case of dehummer, 60 hertz is pretty common among North America and Japan, while 50 hertz tends to be more common in Europe, other parts of Asia, just because of how our electrical grids are set up. But when I turn this on and I start making adjustments, you can see the single slider is changing several parameters in the effect. So you don't have to know what a bass filter frequency Q is. You don't have to understand what the harmonic slope is. All you have to do is over here, less dehum, more dehum, and dial it into where it sounds good, sounds like what you want. We can certainly go through the rest of these. Again, I'm going to share some links on YouTube and on adobe.com that will let you dive into deeper detail on what all of these things do and how to utilize them. But I will show you one more thing with regards to Essential Sound while we're here. And I mentioned ducking, bringing the music down behind the dialogue. So because I've tagged these clips as dialogue and this clip as a music clip, I can do something we call auto ducking. And if I come in and I turn this on, what Audition will do was it will analyze the music clip and all the other clips. And you might have seen it already appear. It's maybe a little subtle over screen share, or maybe it's just the color of this clip. Let me change it to something else by double clicking the color bar and saying, let's choose blue. That helps the little line pop. So you see this purple dotted line that looked a little bit like the volume curve I turned on, I did before, or the volume automation. If you see, if I uncheck and I recheck it, it shows up. And as I start making changes to sensitivity, to how much to duck, the ducking amount, and the speed of the fades, you start to see that line change. And what that really is it's just like I did before with the volume keyframes. It's keyframing volume changes based on what I've told it I want to duck against. In this case, by default, we'll duck against clips that have been tagged as dialogue. So because I tagged these as dialogue and this is music and I've turned on ducking, Audition is going to look up and say, oh, you know what? There's a clip here, there's a clip here, there's a clip here, there's a clip here that are all dialogue. And so I'm going to calculate what the keyframe needs to be there. And you can see it's not just looking at the beginning of the clip and the end of the clip, but it's looking at the content inside, and it's being able to adjust and bring that gain, that volume up in the music when there's a pause or when there's a quiet spot in the middle of the dialogue. It knows that in this clip, the speaking stops here just before the 2-minute mark. And so it brings the volume back up until it starts to talk. As I faded that in right there, you can see as I adjust the fade, it's going to automatically, dynamically update. If I need to nudge this purple clip over now, maybe I want it to align with this question more, we're going to automatically move those fades over. So once you've set it, you can kind of forget it. You can move on to other things. Now, there may be times when you're like, yeah, the automated stuff was great, and I'm glad I don't have to click and draw a million keyframes in Durin. But what if I need to make a creative choice? I really want the music to stay loud over a certain section, maybe over where this purple clip is. Well, we can always come in here and uncheck this monitor clip changes box. And that lets me now adjust those keyframes just like I was doing it from scratch from the beginning. So you can override you can let the AI, the ducking feature, do the initial steps, all the busy work, and then you can come in and add a little bit of creativity and take all the glory. It's fantastic. One more thing here in Audition before we move on to some of the other things that I want to show you is the ability to create a session template. And what that is I'll make a new session here to start from scratch. If you're making a podcast and you tend to find your groove, you tend to have the same sort of format. It's always going to be me as the host. I'm always going to have several seconds of introduction where I'm speaking about the podcast, today's guest. I might have some music in the background. And then at 30 seconds, I'm going to have the introduction where I bring in the guest and we start to talk. You could build that by every time for every episode, or you can set it up once and then save that as a session template. And that lets you use that same format, all your settings, all your media, all your effects, all your automation. You can do them, you set them up once, and then they're always there for every new episode that you make of this project. And I'll show you how a quick way to set that up. So in the case that I just discussed, it's going to be me as the host, and we'll put me on track 1. And then I'll have a guest, maybe guest 1. And maybe sometimes I bring in a second guest or I have a co-host. So we'll have a track for guest 2. And I could certainly visually, maybe I want all of us to be green, just like the color up top. So I'm just going to come in, double click, and I'm just going to turn all these to the default color, which is in our case is green. Now maybe I want that a music track is where I can lay down those background tracks. So I'll rename that one, this fourth track in music, but I'm going to change its color to that yellow we had earlier. And lastly, maybe I want some sound effects. I'll just call this sound effects, and pink is okay, but maybe I really want to go crazy, and I'm just going to choose purple for that and click OK. Now, maybe I don't need track 6 right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that track. And I think that's great. Now, something else I might want to do is while I'm editing, I may want to be able to solo all my dialogue tracks and mute the music and sound with one click. Right now, if I wanted to do that, I have to come in and solo each of these tracks. And one of the things Audition can do is create bus tracks. And what a bus is it's a sort of a virtual audio track that lets you send the output from a bunch of real tracks in, and then have one stream that goes out to your speakers. And so you can control those other tracks with that one track. And what we'll do is we'll really quickly just create that. So I'm going to come and choose multi-track tracks, add stereo bus track. I'm creating a stereo podcast in this case, and it will go wherever right below where my selected track. And I'm going to call this dialogue bus. Now we have this track that can accept output from other tracks and let me do things to them as a group. But we need to tell which tracks we want to go there. So Audition has these 4 track control modes. And by default, we show the input and output of each track. And this is where I can say, you know what, this is going to be this microphone, and this input is going to be that microphone. Or if I'm bringing interviews in, I can separate those out in different ways. But by default, every track is going to try and go out to that master mix, that main mix output. But in this case, I want the dialogue tracks to go through that bus I just created first. So I'm going to change the output for this track to the dialogue bus. And I'll do that for the other 2 tracks as well. And now, anything that happens on any of these tracks, I can mute the dialogue track, and those tracks that feed into it will also be silenced. Or if I have a lot of other tracks, I can solo that, and only those tracks that feed into this bus will be audible. So it gives you a little control over the mix. It's a step that maybe you don't need to do right away, but as you start working with more complex projects, learning about buses and how to set up those what we call submix or buses can really be a useful endeavor. And let me delete this, but let's say I'm always going to have, I was really good friends with Angus Young, and I got permission to use Thunderstruck. So I'm going to drop it in. It's going to be the opening to my podcast every day. But I only need that first little bit. So I'm just going to roll it off, add a little fade out here. And every time I have my podcast, this first 30 seconds of Thunderstruck is my intro music. And maybe I always want to have an intro at the beginning where I'm saying, hey, welcome to my podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and solo my host track. I'm going to arm it for record so that it can record what I say. And I'm going to record a quick intro. Hey, welcome to today's podcast. I'm really excited to see you. We've got some great guests. Let's get right to it. Now I've got that as the intro for every episode of my podcast. I can save that and always have it in there. I could certainly go change it later on episode 5 or 6 if I want to, but it's one step I don't have to do when I'm creating a session template. So I've got these 2 things laid out. I really like them. I want to be able to use them for every episode of my projects, of my podcast. So I'll go up to File, Export, Session as Template. And that's just going to make a copy of this entire session, all the media, any automation, any effects, everything I've done, all the colors that I've laid out, all of that. And it's going to make it available the next time I'm creating a new project. So I'm going to name it my podcast preset, and I'm going to click OK. Now, if I close everything out, goodbye. And now it's a new day. I got a great interview I'm going to bring in for today's episode or this week's episode. I'm going to click new multi-track session. And now in the template dropdown, you can see my podcast preset. So I can click OK. And all that setup work, everything I did before comes in ready for me to start dropping in my clips or recording a new interview and podcast right here in the timeline. It's really fast. It's really easy. And session templates, they're an underused gem that can really save a lot of time and give you that consistent output, that consistent experience of what your podcast sounds like. And, make it a lot easier. Sometimes it can be daunting to get started. You're going through the same routine all the time. And if you can automate as much of that as possible, so much the better. Let's say I've got a great podcast. Let me open something here and I'm ready to create something. I want to get this online. I want the world to hear my podcast. However you've mixed it, whatever you've done. Generally, the first step is to create a new single MP3 or some sort of file from this project. So the quickest way to do that in Audition is to come up to the multi-track menu and choose Mix Down Session. And that's going to combine all the tracks and all the effects and all the automation that we did into a single new file. Now, this, you saw there was no editing, so I'm not going to horrify you with playing this back and listening to it, but just know that this is our finished file, our almost finished file. We can still do additional things to it to prepare it for delivery. And one of those things we might want to do is, if we're uploading, depending on what we're uploading to, is make sure that our overall loudness is matches the requirements for our delivery platforms. So Spotify has one level. Apple has a different level. If we're publishing to some other platforms, they may require different loudness levels. And that can be a little confusing and daunting to somebody who doesn't really understand loudness, but I'm going to show you how to cheat the system. And so I've got my recording here, and I'm just going to drag that into our Match Loudness panel. If you saw, I clicked Window, Match Loudness, and it opened up down here. And all I have to do is drag a file into it, let go, and click the little scan button. If I click it once, it usually stays on and then automatically scans after the fact for any new files I add. So it's going to scan and it's going to say, hey, it's going to give me some information about how loud this file is. That's great. You can spend some time learning about ITU loudness, LUFS, RMS, thresholds, all of that stuff. Or you can kind of come in here and say, you know what? Spotify says I need this to be -14. I can just type target -14 and click run. And Audition's going to go through, analyze that whole file, adjust it so that it meets that loudness requirement. And you can literally just hit save at this point. And when you upload it to Spotify, Spotify will be, oh, I'm working in the beta build. Pretend you didn't see that. Spotify will be, hey, this is great. Perfect. We don't need to make any changes. Let's get you published right away. You can do that for all your different alternatives. There you go. So once it's done making the adjustment. It shows you what it's done. It's added 2.64 decibels of gain. You're now at -14 LUFS, which is what Spotify would like you to upload it to. And you can go on with that. If there's other versions, you can, or other destinations with different settings, you just undo, change your setting down here, -16, and click run. And now you make another copy for that destination and you save it out as an MP3, maybe with the LUFS or the destination as part of the file name. For that, I would just come down, save as MP3 or AAC or whatever file you want. This is my podcast episode 2. And this loudness was maybe it's Spotify edition or something like that. So that allows you to keep track of the different versions, as well as really quickly iterate on the differences you may need for different platforms. And this is great, but you know what? It's just an MP3 file. There's nothing fancy about it. And when I go to publish it, I'm going to want to have some artwork. I want a brand. I want a visual thumbnail that goes along with my podcast that shows up in those directories, that shows up on my mobile apps or my listening tools. And Audition itself doesn't support that, but what we have is some other applications. Now you could jump into Photoshop or Illustrator if you know how to use those. Oops. But Adobe does offer something really simple called Spark, Adobe Spark. And in fact, you can go to spark.adobe.com, but you can also go and Google Adobe Spark Podcast. And it's going to come up with a shortcut to their templates, really, that are just designed for creating podcast cover art and podcast album art. And this is a really great way of creating something very quickly, or spending some time and really building something really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Now for free. And you can see we have a couple of options, but by default, podcast thumbnails are usually this square, 1-to-1. So I'm going to use the default and click Next. And you're going to be able to browse and use a lot of free photos. You can also upload your own photos if you have something you've already designed or that you like. But in this case, I'm going to look for, let's see, I'm just going to look for cats. My podcast is about cats. And I'm going to look and see if there's any images I can use for cats. And wow, I love this one with the cat on the moon. So I'm going to click Next. I'm going to select it and click Next. And and Spark will start to build and let me really templatized how I want this to look. So you can see it automatically centered the cat in the, oh, I don't need that in the picture, but I can move that around left and right. If I don't want it centered, I could certainly move it to the side. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go just a little bit off center. I like it over there. And it automatically puts in the text, so I can start to change what it is. And first time you click on something, Spark is going to give you a little bit of a animated video, a little tutorial on how to use that particular thing in Spark. So when I clicked on the background image, it was going to try and show me, here's what you can do with images. In this case, I clicked on text. It's going to show me what I can do with the text. So I'm going to double click and I'm going to change the name to My Podcast About Cats and click Done. And it puts it all on lines because the initial template had this sort of small box. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to move it down. And I do like that sort of gold. Whoops. I do like that sort of gold color, but let me see if there's other options here. Oh, I kind of like that too. So you can see it's giving me a suggested palette based on the template, the background image. And I can really kind of get in there and play with the palette that was sort of professionally designed, but I still have full control. If I want to say, no, you know what? I want that bright green. I can do whatever I want. It's that flexible. And just like a word editor, I can choose the alignment, all of the good stuff, lots of fonts. But I like what I've got here. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm ready to download this. This is the image for my artwork. I'm going to save it as you can save it as a PNG, a JPEG. I'm going to save it as just a JPEG and download. And you can see it goes right, my post.jpg. It's in my downloads folder, which is great. So I'm going to come back to Audition. Oops, wrong one. And I want to add that JPEG as my album art image. We can do that through Window Metadata. Metadata is any information about a file that isn't the file information itself. So metadata, I'm going to move the panel and dock it over here next to Essential Sound so that I can see everything on screen at once. And you can see there's a few different options for metadata. MP3 files use something called ID3. And this is where I can actually come in and set the album art once I've saved this as an MP3. So let me go ahead, save as MP3, podcast, fine, podcast 1, mix down 1. And it's going to save it as an MP3 file. And then I'll reopen it so that I can make these changes. And of course, I could have selected a shorter file. You know, nothing like sitting around watching progress bars on live streams. All right, so now I have an MP3, and now I can add album art to that MP3 file. So I click Browse. I come to my Downloads folder. I'm going to sort by date added, and there's my post. Click Open, and there's my podcast artwork icon as part of the file. Now, because I've made a change, even though I haven't edited the waveform at all, I've edited the metadata. So really quickly, I'm just going to choose File, Save. It's going to rewrite that file with the new metadata. And we're great. Now it's ready for upload. You can really start to build on using Spark. I'll come back to Spark. Around this, you can start to build a lot of different assets and elements that conform to your brand identity for your podcast, but that you can use on plenty of other projects as well. So maybe you're going to want to start posting your story to Instagram or Facebook or anything. You can really start to use these templates that get you there very quickly. Bring in the content that you've created. If I had saved my past one in the library, I could bring it in right here, and then I would have something that was ready for Instagram, which is the vertical image, or Facebook, which would be horizontal, et cetera, without having to redesign everything from scratch. Now, I'm going to share something before this third part that may come as a surprise, this is when you're getting ready to publish your podcast. Of course, you want as wide an audience as you can get. I want it on everything from Apple iTunes and Apple Podcast to all the way to Spotify, to Amazon, to Libsyn. I want it available on all the smaller hosts and apps that are, bespoke apps and things like that. Where am I going to get the biggest impact? And what do I need to do for those? So this was a study that was done by the University of Florida and Futuri Media about 2 years ago. And it found that the platforms that most listeners consume podcasts and discover new podcasts, which isn't referenced in this slide, is YouTube by more than 2x. That YouTube's discovery platform, its automated playlist and system, and its audience size is so big, so large, that most people discover new podcasts that they weren't setting out to look for specifically on YouTube, which is pretty exciting. It was just pretty interesting. It's a great platform. Obviously, it's free. It's there's lots of material out there on monetizing your content and promoting it. But what YouTube has different from all the other podcast platforms is YouTube requires a visual element. It requires, if not a video, at least something visual that's part of your upload. And that's interesting, and that adds a new a new hook into what we're trying to do. So I created this podcast Mixdown. I'm going to reveal it in Finder so I know where it's at. There it is. It's right in my documents folder. And I'm going to show you how to take your MP3, your podcast, your audio only podcast, and now create a YouTube friendly video that you can just simply upload and be able to cross promote your podcast and find new listeners on YouTube really simply. Unfortunately, Audition doesn't allow me to export this directly. And so I'm going to show you another tool called Adobe's Premiere Rush. And you might have heard of Premiere Pro, which is our very high-end, broadcast and film friendly video editing platform. It's fantastic. If you want to dive into and learn that, all more power to you. It's great. Rush is a very approachable, user-friendly video platform that was really designed for social video creators. And I'm going to show you how to use Rush, which you can do either on your desktop or on your phone or on your iPad or your Android device, and to create that video version of your podcast. So I launched Rush, and I'm going to create a new project for this. And how Rush works is you start to create the project, but you also bring in your media at the same time. So I'm going to come down and name this project My Podcast About Cats, Episode 1. Click OK on the little helpful pop-up. And now it's telling me select my media to create my new project. Well, there's a couple ways I can do that. But really, I'm going to come in here to Downloads, and or to Documents. Can I search on my my podcast Mixdown 1? I'm going to create that. And that's going to start. It's going to place that audio on a timeline. Now it recognizes that it's audio, and so it puts it on an audio track. But right now I still have no visual element. So I can open up the assets folder. I can go back and search for some more assets, or in this case, because I opened it up before, I can just drag that My Post JPEG right into that project assets. It imports it, and now it's an image, and I can just drag it right onto my timeline and let go. And Where did it go? Why don't I see it? What did I do? Oh, I created a new sequence with it. Let's come into that. Where's my sequence? Where's my... There it is. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. I see. It puts it at the beginning helpfully for me. So, and bumps everything else forward. So, note to self when doing this demo in next time, put the image in first and then bring your audio in. But it's easy enough to just drag this back and now we're there. And this is great, but by the default, it only brings those still images in for about 2.5 seconds. And you see it's scaled out. I can't see what I'm doing. So over here on the right side are the different controls that can be used to manipulate elements of the timeline of the project. So in this case, I really want to change the scale. And I can keep the defaults because I need to just shrink the whole thing down. So I'm going to change the width until my entire podcast image is in there. If I wanted to, I could certainly adjust where it sits on the screen. YouTube has a support for widescreen video, so I can make it a little more interesting. And this may allow me to bring in other elements later if I want to get fancy. Maybe I want a scrolling transcript on the left side, or I want to be able to have a slideshow showing off photos or links for whatever's being discussed in the podcast. I can certainly do that here with a little forethought. By using these transform controls. And then as I want to extend this image across the entirety of my podcast, I can just grab the edge, just like you would with a clip in Audition, and drag it out. So I'm going to zoom all the way out, get my whole podcast in view, and you can see that's pretty long. So I'm just going to come in here. Oh, nope, I got to zoom in a little bit further because we got in too close. Zoom, drag it all the way across, drag it out, drag it out. And there may be a faster way to do this. I'm not sure. I may be able to just set the duration in the properties, but right there, I don't have to. We went right to the edge. Podcast goes, and we're good. So, whoops, let me come back to Rush and zoom all the way out. So there we go. My podcast is ready to go. I've got this video. Now I can come down to File. I don't need to save it. We automatically save it in the background. But here's the thing. Now I'm ready to export it, right? I want to put it onto YouTube. I use the share button here, and that lets me either save it to my hard drive as an MP4 or some other video file format, or publish directly to YouTube, maybe directly to Facebook. And as I click each of these, I can sign in with my credentials for my podcast or my account, and we'll actually automatically render your video and your podcast video, upload it to YouTube, and publish it with the settings that you select whenever that pop-up box gets around to getting my sign-in information. Like always, you can twirl this down and choose some custom settings if you want to adjust how that's going to come across to YouTube. But it just gives you that really simple pathway of being able to publish a video version of your podcast after the fact to these platforms without having to jump through a bunch of hoops. I know we covered a lot. Before I go back and see if there's any questions, I did say I was going to show a couple of things. If you're a fan of learning by YouTube, I highly recommend going and searching Music Radio Creative and following Mike Russell. Mike Russell's tutorials about audio production, podcast production, making jingles, mixing things together, cleaning up problems, using Audition. They're fantastic. They're just about some of the best that are available, paid or free. I also recommend for maybe a more advanced approach to audio production, going to YouTube and looking up Cinema Sound. And Cinema Sound was originally envisioned as audio for film and video production, but they've really expanded and they offer a lot more to podcasters. They've done some good partnerships and really gone in depth into how to get started with podcasting. A lot of the detail around microphone selection, room selection, how to treat a room, how to clean up sound, noise, and other sounds like that. So those are two great resources. You can always go to inside Audition or Rush. You can always come up to Help and go to the Adobe Audition Help website. If you have questions or you have feature requests, I'll always recommend that you come down to help provide feedback. And that brings you to a website we call User Voice that allows you to submit or vote on questions, problems, requests, and we usually try and answer that really quick. And one more quickie thing, you might have noticed this: download sound effects and more. Your Creative Cloud membership comes with, I think it's around 10,000 sound effects, different libraries of different kinds of sound effects. So you can grab in great royalty free. You're free to use them in your productions. Science fiction bubbling sounds and electronic sounds and music blips and lots of different great sound effects. This kind of library would typically cost quite a bit. It's yours free for being an Audition or Adobe customer. And with that, I'm gonna pop over and see if stop screen share and see if there's any questions. I don't have a public chat room or anything like that, so I'm going to depend on our gracious hosts. Brian asks, as I get more acquainted with dialogue and music tags and ducking, is there a general standard for decibel range your VO track should be when there's music beneath it? Honestly, the industry itself is sort of shifting from a fixed decibel to the loudness units of measurement. So to come in and say, oh, your VO should be at -9, or your music is -27 decibels, not really. The standard is what sounds good. And with things like the Essential Sound Panel, we've made some assumptions on what general standards should be. In some cases, that those may be a little conservative, so the music may be quieter than you like, or the dialogue may be louder than you wanted or quieter than you wanted, because we follow certain broadcast industry standards for loudness in those cases. So the short answer is not really. Long answer is there's general standards, but again, it's really flexible. So what you put there, -9 for VO and -27 for music, is pretty kind of common as like a good starting point, good starting place. But again, it's going to be dependent on the type of music. -27 for an orchestral chamber piece is going to be very different from -27 decibels of a Metallica song. And so you're starting with those kind of standards and defaults, it's just something that you're eventually probably going to want to move past and really customize with your taste level. Georgia asks, once you start to have a ton of clips on multiple tracks, is there a way to insert a clip at minute 2 that will automatically adjust all clips without unsettling everything? Sure. That's called ripple. I'm sorry. To automatically insert, I see what you're asking. Sort of. So let's say I have this split into a bunch of clips here, and I want to insert a little something from, let's see, from this mark, and we'll come back to multi-track. I want to bring a little something in, or maybe I just want to bring that little snippet in. So there's not a way right now to drop this here and have it bump everything forward automatically. But what you can do is when you position it where you want it, you can put the playhead here. There's some different commands for doing different things. One of them is selecting all clips forward in either one track or all the tracks. So in this case, I can say select all clips to end of track, and it's going to select everything forward. And then I can bump this forward to match the duration of what I just what I inserted. It's not as elegant as I think you're asking for. It is something that we have. Oh, I wasn't sharing my screen. I apologize. I'll tell you what. We'll get something. I'll get something on YouTube and share it. I know there's a message thread on the calendar invitation for this on Podcast PM University. I'll add a link there, or I'll add some notes there so that we can I can make it a little bit more clear. And in fact, because we're at the top of the hour, maybe that's just where we take the conversation and take it to the comment thread there. And I'm happy to continue answering questions.
So Durin, if people want to reach out to you or reach out to some other folks that are savvy with some of these things, what's the best way to do that?
certainly the Adobe community forums. If you're in Audition, you click Help Audition Forums. That's a great place. It's a good community of other Audition users who can answer questions.
Okay.
If you need to get in touch, if you need to report an issue or have a question, feel free to reach out to us directly. We have an email address, audbugs@adobe.com. We traditionally used it for bug reporting before we had some fancy websites, but you can still reach the team and myself directly, audbugs@adobe.com. That'll come right to us. Otherwise, reach out to us on Facebook. We're all part of Podcast Movement Facebook groups. Nice people. Everybody's happy to chat.
All right, Durin, we really appreciate this. Thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and let you loose. Look forward to hopefully seeing you in Nashville this summer.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to being able to travel anywhere. Nashville in summer, Dallas in August, whatever you guys want to throw at us, somewhere hot. A change of scenery would be amazing.
Well, thank you again. And to everyone, we appreciate your questions. If you have more questions, this will be posted in Podcast Movement University. That's university.podcastmovement.com. And you can interact there as well. So thank you again, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.